What if one of Jesus' closest followers was a political revolutionary? What if the man standing right beside him during the most pivotal moments in history was someone the Gospels barely mention? Today, we re-uncovering the hidden story of an apostle so obscure that most Christians don't even know his name. Hi, I'm your host here at Christian Curiosity, and if you love discovering the untold stories of Scripture, hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. Simon the Zealot. That's his name. But here's the thing, almost nobody talks about him. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all list him among the 12 apostles, but then he practically vanishes from the biblical record. No dramatic moments, no famous miracles, no letters bearing his name. Just a man who walked with Jesus, changed the world, and then disappeared into history. So who was he really? And why does his story matter so much that we're bringing it back to light today? Let's start with his name because it tells us something crucial. Simon wasn't unusual. There were 2 Simons among the 12 apostles. But this Simon had a title, the Zealot. In Matthew and Mark, he's called Simon the Canaanite, which comes from an Aramaic word meaning the same thing, zealot. That word carries weight. It doesn't just mean he was enthusiastic or devoted, though he certainly was. In first century Judea, being called a zealot meant something specific, something dangerous. It meant you were part of a movement, a political movement, a resistance movement against Roman occupation. Picture this. It's around 06 AD in Judea. Rome has tightened its grip on the land. Taxes are crushing. Roman soldiers patrol the streets. And a group of Jews rises up. They call themselves the Zealots. They believe God's law supersedes Caesar's law. They believe armed resistance is not just justified but necessary. They're willing to fight, willing to die. Some historians believe Simon may have been part of this movement before he met Jesus. Imagine that. A man trained in resistance. A man who believed in revolution. A man who picked up a sword for a cause. Then he meets Jesus. We don't know exactly where or when. The Gospels don't give us that detail. But at some point, Simon encounters a rabbi from Nazareth who teaches something radically different. Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. If you're Simon the Zealot, if you've spent years believing that Rome must be overthrown, that violence is the answer, that God demands armed rebellion. This message must have shattered everything you thought you knew. Yet Simon follows. He leaves behind whatever life he had. He becomes one of the 12. What does that tell us? It tells us that Simon was willing to be transformed. He was willing to abandon his old convictions, his old identity, his old cause, and embrace something completely different that takes more courage than picking up a sword. That takes the kind of faith that rewires your entire worldview. We know almost nothing about Simon's personality from Scripture. The Gospels don't record him asking questions like Peter does. They don't show him struggling with doubt like Thomas. They don't capture him in moments of anger or confusion or joy. He's present at the Last Supper. He's there when Jesus is arrested. He's among the disciples after the resurrection. But he's quiet. He's in the background. And that silence is deafening, isn't it? What was he thinking during those 3 years? What was he wrestling with? Here's what we can infer. Simon was a listener. He was an observer. He was someone who could sit with a radical message and let it transform him from the inside out. In a group of 12 men, each with their own personality and struggles, Simon the Zealot stands out precisely because he doesn't stand out. He's the apostle who teaches us that faithfulness doesn't require fame. Transformation doesn't require recognition. After Jesus ascended, the biblical record goes silent on Simon, but history doesn't. And this is where traditions and legends take over, and we need to be clear about what we're re-entering here. These are not Scripture. These are stories passed down through centuries of Christian tradition. Some may contain kernels of truth. Others may be embellished or even invented. But they're worth exploring because they tell us how the early church remembered Simon. They tell us what his legacy meant. According to tradition, Simon became a missionary. Some accounts say he traveled to Egypt. Others claim he went to Persia. Still others say he journeyed to Britain or even to the Caucasus region. The details vary wildly depending on which ancient source you consult. But the consistent thread is this: Simon didn't stay in Jerusalem. He didn't settle into a comfortable life. He took the message of Jesus to the ends of the known world. The man who once believed in armed resistance now believed in spiritual resistance. The revolutionary became an evangelist. One tradition, recorded in various early Christian texts, says Simon traveled to Persia with another apostle named Jude. Together, they preached the gospel in regions where no Christian had gone before. They faced opposition. They performed miracles. They converted thousands. And eventually, according to these accounts, they were martyred. Some traditions say Simon was crucified. Others say he was sawed in half. Still, others describe different methods of execution. The specifics are murky, lost to time, but the consistency is striking. Simon died as a martyr, faithful to the end. Why does this matter? Because it completes the arc. A man who once believed in violent revolution dies for a message of love and redemption. A man who once thought the answer was the sword discovers that the answer is the cross. That's not just a personal transformation. That's a testimony. That's a witness that echoes across 2,000 years. But here's the real mystery, the thing that keeps historians and theologians puzzled. Why is Simon so obscure? Why does Scripture tell us so little about him? We have 4 Gospels, and they all mention him, but none of them give us a single story. Not one. Compare that to Peter, who dominates the narrative. Compare it to John, who leans on Jesus' breast. Compare it to even Judas, whose betrayal is central to the Passion account. Simon the Zealot is listed, and then he's gone. Some scholars suggest that Simon's obscurity might be intentional. Maybe the early church wanted to downplay his possible connection to the Zealot movement. Maybe there was sensitivity around the fact that one of Jesus' just closest followers had ties to armed resistance. If the church was trying to present Christianity as non-threatening to Rome, highlighting Simon's background might have been problematic, so his story was minimized. His role was reduced to a name on a list. Others suggest something different. Maybe Simon's significance wasn't in dramatic moments or famous deeds. Maybe his significance was in his quiet faithfulness. In a group of 12, someone had to be the steady presence. Someone had to listen more than speak. Someone had to embody the principle that transformation is more important than recognition. That was Simon. Think about your own life for a moment. How many people do you know who are quietly faithful? Who serve without seeking attention? Who've undergone profound changes in their beliefs or values, but you only know about it because you were paying close attention? Those people are everywhere. They're the backbone of communities. They're the ones who show up. They're the ones who've genuinely changed, and yet we rarely celebrate them. We rarely tell their stories. Maybe that's why Simon's story resonates so powerfully once you start digging into it, because his obscurity is actually his greatest lesson. Here's what we know for certain. Simon the Zealot was called by Jesus. He spent 3 years in the presence of God incarnate. He witnessed miracles. He heard teachings that transformed the world. He was there at the crucifixion. He encountered the risen Christ, and then he spent the rest of his life spreading that message, likely at great personal cost. That's not obscure. That's profound. The tension in Simon's life between his old identity as a zealot and his new identity as an apostle mirrors a tension that every believer faces. How do we let go of what we thought we knew? How do we allow our convictions to be challenged and reshaped? How do we move from fighting for a cause to serving a person? Simon did it. He walked away from revolution and embraced redemption. And in doing so, he became part of the greatest revolution in human history, not a political one, but a spiritual one. The early church remembered Simon as a martyr. They remembered him as a missionary who traveled far and wide. They remembered him as a man who was faithful unto death. But they didn't remember him as famous. They didn't remember him as the one who wrote books or performed the most miracles or led the biggest churches. They remembered him as faithful. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's exactly what Simon would have wanted. His story raises a question that haunts us. What are we willing to give up? What old identities, old beliefs, old causes are we clinging to? What would it take for us to be transformed the way Simon was? Not transformed into someone famous or celebrated, but transformed into someone faithful? Someone willing to follow, even when the path is unclear? Someone willing to be obscure if that's what faithfulness requires. Simon the Zealot teaches us that the most important transformations happen quietly. They happen in the heart. They happen when we encounter something or something so true, so real, so compelling that we have no choice but to change. And then we live out that change day after day, year after year, whether anyone notices or not. That's the legacy of an apostle the world forgot. That's the power of a story hidden in plain sight. So here's what I want to know. What transformation is God calling you to make right now? What old identity are you being asked to release? And are you willing to be faithful even if nobody ever tells your story? Because Simon was. And his obscurity might be the most important thing about him. Stick around next time. We're exploring an apostle whose story is so wild, so unexpected, that it'll completely change how you read the Gospels. Thanks for watching.